When was the last time you were at Mass and heard a homily on contraception or abortion? Hopefully, never. I'm Simon Rafe, and I'm taking the hard line. Hello there, I'm Simon Rafe, and welcome to Hardline, the show that tells you how you are wrong, but more importantly, what you can do about it. My producer, the inimitable Joe Enders, is over at the other desk, and he and I will be talking about unspecified stuff later on, and then we'll be joined by Church Militant's Rome correspondent, Jules, to help us understand what's going on in the Vatican these days. But for now, homilies about contraception and abortion, I guess, and gay marriage and sex before marriage, and probably even euthanasia and, I don't know, all the big Catholic stuff. You know the litany. The litany of thou shalt nots that the media constantly bangs on about Catholics being all repressive and backward about. The litany of thou shalt nots that the media and the culture says are in fact thou shalts, or at the very least, thou shalt be fine with thems. But it's not just the media and the culture and leftists, but I repeat myself, it's not just the enemies of the church who are always banging on about this. How often have you heard the question, when was the last time you were at Mass and heard a homily on contraception or abortion? I know you heard it just a couple of minutes ago when I asked you, but most of the time when you hear it, it's being asked in a different way. I'm sort of genuinely interested in the answer, but really I'm just using it as a rhetorical device to pique your curiosity at the start of a program competing for your attention in an increasingly crowded field. The only thing I have going for myself is that I'm not an artificial intelligence. My intelligence, or lack thereof, is entirely natural. But when most people, most Catholics, ask that question, they are also using it as a rhetorical device, but in a different way. They aren't asking the question, they are accusing the answer of being, you didn't, but you should. There aren't homilies on abortion and contraception. When was the last time you heard one on one of these very important topics? These most important topics. The ones that are central, abiding teachings of the faith, the things we Catholics need to be laser focused on, perhaps even to the exclusion of all else. You didn't hear a homily on contraception or abortion, and you haven't, and you won't, and that is the problem with the church today. Why, if priests were just up there every day and twice on Sundays banging on about contraception and abortion, the world would be Christian, the USA would be Catholic, the rainbow flag would be a dim memory, dogs and cats would get along, and the world would buy itself a Coke. Bang! Silver bullet time. Maybe I'm exaggerating, but I'd be willing to bet you've heard someone say something like that, or maybe you've even thought it yourself. If priests just talked about contraception and abortion in homilies, things would be better. The fact they don't talk about it is a bad thing and a sign of their cowardice and venality and compromise with the world and maybe even agreement with those evils. Silence is consent and all that. Well, I'm not going to disagree with the latter, that there is cowardice and venality and maybe even agreement with the world among many priests today. That's a no-brainer, and as we discussed, while my brain is not artificial, it certainly exists. You don't need me to tell you many priests today are compromised by moral failings. But perhaps you do need me to tell you the failure to talk about it in homilies isn't necessarily a bad thing, especially for you. That is, specifically you listening now. It certainly isn't a silver bullet that will solve the crisis, and we need to stop thinking it is, because that thinking is a seductively dangerous distraction. When was the last time you were at Mass and heard a homily on contraception or abortion? Hopefully never, and I mean that. First off, you. I'm talking to you and about you. Not some hypothetical liberal Catholic who thinks doctrine is open to interpretation, not one who rejects the church's teaching, not one who needs to be told contraception and abortion are evil. Let's be honest, you're watching this show. It's premium. You've paid for it, made the conscious choice to sign up. You haven't stumbled on this on YouTube or Rumble or MyFacePlace or whatever the cool kids are ticking their tweet talks on these days. You signed up for premium to support us and, more importantly, to get support for yourself. You know the teaching of the church. You agree with it. You accept it. You might not understand it fully. You might stumble when articulating how or why it is to someone else. You certainly will struggle to live it every day. God knows we all do that. But you aren't someone rejecting it. You don't need to be told what it is. You need to be encouraged and supported and strengthened to stick to it. Is a homily at Mass going to do that for you? Probably not, because any problems or difficulties you are having, you, a person who believes the faith and tries to live it, you, a person fully on board with the church's teaching, the help you need isn't generalized. It's not the kind of thing that can make a homily to 300 people, or as we Catholics like to call it, 50 families. And that's another issue I'll come to in a bit, but for now, if you are struggling with living out the church's moral teaching, what you need is not collective preaching, but individual encouragement and support and advice. The question should be, when was the last time you talked to your priest about contraception, abortion, whatever you were struggling with? When was the last time your priest made himself available for such a talk? Maybe that's the question. That is the issue. In fact, I'm sure it is. That is the question you should be asking, which any priests listening should be paying real attention to. When was the last time you made yourself available one-on-one for your flock, Father? Could you make yourself more available? Have you, in fact, Father, been abnegating that responsibility in favor of fire and brimstone homilies that just gin up the crowd and send them on their way feeling good about themselves? Yeah, we'll turn to that later, too. Let's give the questioners the benefit of the doubt. Let's assume they don't mean homilies should be given on contraception and abortion in a good parish to a congregation of faithful Catholics. No, they should be given in the liberal parishes, in the 1960s brutalist monstrosity buildings, in the gathering spaces and Catholic communities, in St. Suburbia or Our Lady of the Compromise. And certainly it would be good if the priests in those parishes believed the church's teaching on contraception and abortion, because I suspect some of them don't. Even if they do, they certainly don't teach it, do they? Surely a homily or two would do some good. Not really, and it would probably do more harm than good. Remember, the homily is generalized, universal, delivered en masse to a mass of people. There's no tailoring that to their specific needs, no ability to make an individual argument, no way to respond to questions and queries and doubts. On that very note, there are going to be people who disagree with this and who write to me, and when we email back and forth, they're going to come and see it my way because I will be able to respond to them and their particular objections and concerns. You see how this works? Out of the average Catholic congregation, some are going to believe the teaching, so telling them what it is doesn't help. What they need is individual encouragement. And there will be some, perhaps most, who don't accept the teaching and who are going to reject it. Do you think they don't know the church is against contraception and abortion? They hear nothing but that from the media all day, every day. The church is bad because she says no to the pill. The Pope hates your condoms. Catholics want to be in your bedroom. I assure you we don't. Anyway, the people who reject the teaching have done just that. They have rejected it. They have heard it, they have weighed it and measured it, and they have found it wanting. The fact they are wrong, the fact they are selflessly setting themselves up for a world and a next world of hurt is irrelevant. They have heard the teaching and they have rejected it. Do you really think a 5-minute homily delivered generally without consideration of the reasons, without responding to their objections, is going to change that? Heads up, it's not. It's a waste of time at best, and at worst, it's just going to turn them off and send them running to the next parish over, which is even worse. Again, we're seeing what the answer is. Individual, tailored conversations with these people, perhaps from the priest, perhaps from their friends and families and parishioners. It's called evangelization or apologetics, depending on how opposed to the teaching a person is. You should try it. Let's not forget, contraception and abortion are important teachings. They impact almost every human being in the 21st century in their day-to-day lives, socially, politically, economically, in their families and homes. They are very important, but they are what I would call apex teachings. Imagine the faith like a pyramid. Like one of those tombs for the ancient Egyptian pharaoh, or if you are of a particular bent, the grain silos Joseph built. Incredibly wide at the base and getting narrower and narrower as it goes up until right at the tippy top, right at the apex, is a tiny point. The Egyptians, who had the same attitude to aesthetics as Donald Trump, covered the very top in brilliant gold, shining in the sun. It could be seen for miles and was the thing everyone talked about. But there's a lot of stone holding it up. When Ramses II built the pyramids, when he made his mighty works amid the lone and level sands ye must look on and despair, he did not start with a glorious golden cap. He didn't even start by laying great blocks of stone. He started by leveling the ground and building a foundation, and then he laid stone upon stone until eventually he could put the golden cap on top. Yeah, I know Ramses didn't build the pyramids because they were out of fashion by the time he was pharaoh, but you've heard of him and you haven't heard of Khufu, and the poem is by Shelley and it's a masterpiece, okay? The point is, I hope, made. You cannot start teaching the Catholic faith by jumping straight into contraception is bad, okay, any more than you can build a pyramid by starting at the top. You need the clearing of the ground, the foundation, the courses of stone. One could turn the metaphor into an allegory. Turning the ground is disproving existing spirituality. The foundation is authentic philosophy. The successive courses of stones are revealed theologies, each building on the other. But I wouldn't insist on that. Rather, I would simply point out that to accept the Church's teaching on contraception requires a Catholic understanding, a Christian anthropology, a knowledge of who God is and what he wants from us, an admission of what we are and why we are made. These things don't need to be known formally in the manner of a graduate course in philosophy and theology, but they do need to be known, to be understood, to be accepted and lived in the heart. One homily, half heard, surrounded by screaming kids while impatiently waiting to get to the ball game isn't going to do that. It takes evangelization and argument and slow persuasion and the dismantling of wrong-headed thinking, brick by corrupted brick. Your silver bullet is a scattershot canister of paintballs that is just going to leave people annoyed. And about those screaming kids, maybe they're not screaming, but maybe they shouldn't be hearing about abortion and contraception, sex stuff. Grown-up stuff, adult stuff. Let's be honest, some of our complaint about Drag Queen Story Hour and Alice Has Two Mummies is that it promotes deviancy. But part of the complaint is also that sex, in general, even good, normal, healthy, wonderful sex that leads to babies and not STDs, isn't appropriate for all ages. And if it is appropriate, maybe it should be delivered again, individually and tailored to the child and by his parents in a way that allows them to respond to his questions and concerns. Kids should not be hearing about how you can do sex wrong before they know how to do it right, and certainly not before they should know about it at all. Maybe I'm an old fuddy-duddy. Maybe kids should hear all about the horrors of abortion and the evils of contraception and how mommies and daddies cannot be mommies and daddies if they really want. Or maybe you think sex education for your children is difficult or embarrassing, and so is evangelization, and so you leave it to the priest and his homily. And that's the main problem. First, the idea the priest should be giving homilies about abortion and contraception immediately removes any responsibility from you. If the priest was saying it well, all would be well. No, it wouldn't. But it's not well, and the reason why is you don't talk about it. You need to evangelize. You need to persuade people. You need to teach. Do the priests need to do it too? Yes, of course. But I'm not talking to them. I'm talking to you. But secondly, and perhaps more importantly, a homily where you agree with every word. So, one, on contraception or abortion, a homily where you agree is a homily where you aren't challenged. You're not called out. You're not called to change. You're not called wrong. The homily is supposed to break open the Word of God and give you something you hadn't considered. Preaching is supposed to call you to change, to become better. That is the whole point. If all you hear is stuff you agree with, you go away thinking, I'm all right, Jack. Thank God I am not like the tax collector, the liberal Catholics. Thank God I don't abort or contracept or have gay sex. No, you don't. But that doesn't make you virtuous. First, are you ignoring your other flaws, other sins, because no one talks about them in this obsession with abortion and contraception and homosexuality? Are you missing them because the light isn't shining on them? Are your priests' homilies and the books you read and the podcasts you listen to haranguing others and letting you off the hook? Secondly, are you actually doing anything virtuous? Are you hoping to achieve salvation by what you are not doing rather than what you are? Protestants rant about how Catholics think they are saved by works, but from where I'm standing, a sight too many of you aren't even thinking that. You're thinking you're saved by inaction. Lord, I did not murder any children and I never wore a condom, so tell me I am saved. That is the danger of those homilies and why I say we should never hear them. Not as homilies. They do little good and they do much harm. And the greatest harm is that we risk being left feeling we are all right because we are not committing some narrow, specific set of sins. We should be challenged. Every piece of the faith, everything that is Catholic we consume should challenge us, should call us out, should push us to be better, to be brighter, to be holier. And that is what Hardline is and always will be. Always, without exception, I will call you out. And of course, I'm calling myself out. This show will be hard to listen to. You will be angry. You will reject what I say. You will wonder why you pay for it. For the same reason you pay a personal trainer. You don't pay them to tell you everything is hunky-dory. You pay them so they will tell you you are wrong, to push you to work harder. This show won't make you feel better. It will make you feel worse so that you can go away and become better. I'm Simon Rafe, and this is the Hardline. So, Joe, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that this episode is really interesting because it kind of highlights the other half of the discussion when it comes to homilies that, people need to hear, because everybody initially complains about with homilies where it's like, okay, so you're going to go and give a homily to like a bunch of people that already know that Jesus loves them, and then the whole homily is like, well, just so you guys know, Jesus really loves you, and that you need to always be in prayer and take everything that you're doing in prayer. Oh my gosh, I've heard complaints about that so many times. Now you took the other side. I found that very interesting.
Yeah, I think, what you've actually got to address is, and the point that I brought up, is this question of your homily's got to be effective, and your homily, really any form of interaction between two Catholics that's not just like, shooting the breeze about the weather or the sports or whatever. Every single interaction between two Catholics, from a priest or to a laity or just two laity talking, should always be, how can we challenge the other person? How can we help the other person improve himself? And really, if you're going to do, as you say, the kind of Jesus loves you homily, well, I know Jesus loves me, but what does that cause me to change? Or you're going to do the abortion is bad to a bunch of people who have never considered abortion, never going to consider abortion. It's a waste of time. You're not calling them out. You're actually just giving them this sort of, you're all right, Jack support, which isn't helpful.
Right, and the other thing about that is that when it comes to the abortion contraception issue, I think everyone in there knows that the church thinks it's wrong. The problem is that they think that they can dissent from it and still believe in whatever they believe, or they think that it can be legal, or that you can think that these things should be legal and still be a practicing Catholic in good standing, when you actually can't. There's a giant discussion that needs to be had about that. You can't be presenting yourself for the Holy Eucharist if you're using birth control for the specific purposes, obviously, of preventing pregnancy. You can't believe in abortion and go up to receive Holy Communion. I think it would be far more valuable. It harkens back to a time when I went to a church that right before they did the consecration, the priest would stop everything and be like, just to let everybody know, if you're in a state of mortal sin, please do not come up and receive communion. You can come up, you can put the cross over you, and we will give you a blessing. We can do that. That's the type of stuff that I'd like to hear more of in homilies.
Yeah, and I think even with that, I mean, this is kind of tangential, but I think it's fun and interesting to get on it. The phrase, if you are in a state of mortal sin or conscious of grave sin or something like that, okay, that is a term that in many cases Catholics are not necessarily going to understand because of poor catechism.
Yeah, then let's define it. Let's define it. That's a great homily.
Yeah, especially I think at events like weddings and funerals, because of course weddings and funerals, people are coming there and maybe they haven't been to Mass for a very long time. They're just going because of a social pressure at this point. And saying if you're in a state of mortal sin or you must be in a state of grace, what do those terms mean? They need to be defined for those, just once in a blue moon Catholics. They need to be defined for them. For example, saying, if you have missed Mass, you are not in a state of grace and you cannot receive the Eucharist at this time unless you go to confession for that. If you are engaging in practices such as cohabitation and so forth. And some people would think, oh, this is kind of a big downer on the wedding, or this is very intrusive in a funeral and stuff. Well, kind of more of a downer is committing sacrilege and committing some sort of
winding up in hell.
Right. I mean, that's the ultimate downer there.
Hey, when you go up to final judgment, and God's like, yeah, you ain't coming in. That's a bit of a downer. Why don't we do the downers now? So we can just get those out of the way.
And again, of course, it's not a question of saying that the homily should be something that comes and just like attacks people and beats them up and tells them you're absolutely horribly wrong and you're an irredeemable sinner. But what it should be is it should be saying, okay, let's try to address something that you, as the audience in the homily, can engage with, can respond to, and can make changes in your life in order to become better and in order to become holier. I think that that is kind of the key point for homilies. Like I say, that's what I was talking about with homilies on abortion and contraception. They don't actually help in general terms. They're not a helpful thing that leads people to holiness.
No, I agree. Everybody knows. Everybody knows. Everybody
knows. All right, well, great talking there to Joe. And of course, every week I will be talking to Joe, my inimitable producer, who of course is there in the control room pushing all the buttons and playing with the switches and stuff. I think he has more fun doing that than he does doing his Red Top Report show. Anyway, now it is time for a discussion with a sophisticated gentleman. It is time for Gentleman's Chat with Jules in Rome. Jules, how are you, my friend?
Simon, buongiorno. I'm fine. I'm wonderful. It's been raining in Rome, but we also have splashes of glorious sunshine.
Well, that's absolutely wonderful, Jules. A question I do want to ask, because I've heard different answers, and I want to settle this directly from the horse's mouth. How do you pronounce your surname? Because I've heard Gomes and I've heard Gomez, and Gomez sounds awfully like Latin American to me.
You're absolutely right. It's Gomez is the Spanish version, but the Spanish spells it with a Z or a Z at the end, and correctly pronounced, it's Gomes, because it's Portuguese, and part of my ancestry is Portuguese, and so. But people in England could not say Gomes very, very well, so we just decided to go with Gomez.
Ah, okay. Well, I will try to remember to do Gomes as a matter of respect. Obviously, Rafe, it's just like the greatest variations. Rafe is constantly the one that I get all of the time. Every single time I talk to my bank, it's like, can I speak to Simon Rafe? And I feel like saying, no, you can't, because he doesn't exist. But there we go. So obviously, Jules, you're our Rome correspondent, and I think our audience would be absolutely fascinated to know, what is the average day in the life for Church Militant's Rome correspondent? What is it that you do? And if you spend all day at the gelato shop, you're going to have to lie about it because people aren't going to be happy. But what is it that you do on a day-to-day basis to get us these great stories?
Well, Simon, when I first joined Church Militant and Christine Niles asked me if I would take the job, my response to her was, are you guys crazy? Are you serious about a full-time Rome correspondent? Because I'm going to be underemployed. What on earth do I do? I'm going to have long afternoons enjoying Italian pranzo and vino and gelato, as you rightly said. But soon I came to realize that my role here is almost like that of a circus juggler. I'm juggling bowls and plates and knives and forks and spoons, some of them swords as well, all in a single day. And I'm telling people now, I wish I could clone myself in two, or I wish Church Militant had two Rome correspondents covering the Vatican. Because I not only cover Rome, as you know, but also much of Europe and sometimes report on Asia and Africa as well. But my morning begins very early because I've got to then file my story for Church Militant by the time you guys get into the studio. And it obviously begins with looking at the Italian newspapers, 5 or 6 Italian newspapers, news in different other languages, French, German, to make sure that I'm not missing out on anything major in Europe. Looking at the Catholic media, looking at the secular media, reading the tons of emails we get from the Holy See press office every day in Italian, and trying to make sense of all that. And at the same time, attempting to keep up with sources from Italy and from different parts of the world who are sending me tips and asking me to look at different stories. So the morning begins with that, but very soon I have to decide what today's story is going to be. and then settle down to write it. If, of course, there is no press conference and I've got to take my train and rush to the Vatican and cover that press conference, but that changes the day altogether. And then the afternoon is spent in more research and then, of course, talking to sources, communicating, keeping in touch with lots of people, because that's huge in the life of a journalist, as you know. Yeah. And then we shoot our program for evening news, and I've got to prepare for that, which means writing the story in a different genre, producing it for Church Militant. And that's part of the job I enjoy as well. So by the time I get to evening and to putting my feet up with a pipe and a glass of coffee, it can be very late sometimes. Yeah. But it's a day well spent. And of course, I must say, very importantly, punctuated by prayer and soaking myself with Holy Scripture. I can't survive without that.
Well, I mean, that's wonderful, Jules. I mean, obviously, it sounds like you have got a very, very busy schedule there. And I think it's good for our audience to realize just how involved and engaged you are, that this isn't just like, we just got this Anglo-Indian dude that we've like stuffed in a tiny little apartment in Rome, and periodically he comes up and, talks about something he might have seen. That obviously you are doing all of this research, all of this information, finding all of this out. And as well, it is wonderful that you're finding time to pray and to get deep into Scripture and get involved. That really is the lifeblood of everything that we do here at the Apostolate. Obviously, we start with morning prayer, we finish the day with evening prayer, we have the Rosary, and we have the Divine Mercy Chaplet and little prayers throughout the day. It's very important. You did mention that you had some, covered stories in Asia and Africa. And I remember that you were covering there the story of the cardinal in India. And it was this great scandal and great horror. And it was really, you were the only chap covering it, it seemed.
Well, it always reminded me of the Watergate scandal, Simon, the tapes, because I got this recorded phone call, 14.5-minute phone call. I mean, it was so clear, not only the quality of the audio, but the voice of Cardinal Gracias and Bishop William, who had this massive scandal with 5 mistresses, about at least 2 children that we knew of, embezzlement, kidnapping. We had a video, first-person video testimony from the lady who was kidnapped by Bishop William's goons, and nobody was willing to touch this story. And we got the audio. Cardinal Gracias issued sort of denial, because he couldn't deny his own voice, but he said that it had been mischievously doctored, which of course was not true at all. Yes, because, every news organization edits something for length. The first 5 minutes of the audio were them talking about the COVID situation in India. But I'm told by very reliable sources that it was our stories that rattled the offices in the Vatican concerned with this, particularly Cardinal Tagle's dicastery for evangelization. And it was only because of this, and we wrote story after story after story, it was only because of this that finally, they had dummy investigation. It took over a year. We were waiting a year and a half, no results. I phoned the papal nuncio's office, and they were shocked that I got the audio. But to their credit, they said, well, you're a journalist, you need to do your job. But it was only because of our stories that finally, I think last week, an apostolic administrator has been appointed. And Bishop William has had to go on leave. He says it's medical leave, but, they've said, just leave the diocese for the moment and we'll take care of things.
Yeah, we know the truth. Again, I think these are just wonderful examples, of a story that, nobody but Church Militant is covering. And nobody really but you could have been covering this story. It would be very difficult for us to have covered this story without having you in Rome, without having having your familiarity with the players, without having your familiarity with the Indian church, because I know you've done a number of stories on the Indian church there. And I think this is absolutely wonderful. And, you know, obviously, moving forward, each week on Hardline, you and I are going to have our little gentleman's chat here, you know, and we're going to have this conversation. We're going to talk about these stories, and we're going to see whatever's going on in Rome. But in addition, I hope that people can learn more about you, Jules, because I think they just kind of see you as, well, there's church militants face in Rome, and they hear about some cardinal or some bishop or some dicastery doing something, and then they move on. But obviously there's an entire, you know, a person behind that, and I think there's a great importance there. And I would say to all of our audience watching, obviously the primary work that you see for Jules is news articles and video reports, and of course his segments in the evening news. And of course all of that is available for free for people. What I would urge people to do is, if you like Jules's coverage, please donate to us, because that enables us to continue to have Jules doing the work, which we do make, of course, for free. All right, Jules, that's all we have time for this week. I will see you next week back here on Hardline. But again, thank you so much for this gentleman's chat.
I can't tell you what a pleasure it has been, Simon. Thank you so much, and God bless you in Detroit.
God bless you, Jules. Take care. So that's the show. I hope that you have enjoyed it. Please let me know what you think in the comments or via email. This is the first show, the first episode of Hardline, and we want to know what you think. But the show is going to be like this. It's going to be a show that challenges you. It's going to be a show that provokes you. It's going to be a show that calls you to be better. Why do I do that show? Because I need it myself. I'm Simon Rafe, and I've taken the Hardline.